So it's finally over. The trial, FTC versus Microsoft, is now been wrapped up. They've had their 5 days, and we are going to be waiting on a decision from Judge Corley. Now, from what we understand, when they finished off the closing arguments, the closing statements, Judge Corley came out and said that it isn't going to take 2 or 3 months for this decision. And we also saw the report from yesterday from Seeking Alpha that we should have a decision sometime by next week. But specifically, Judge Corley says this, that they have wrapped up the closing statements and the hearing is finished, and will now look over the submitted arguments, evidence, and testimony and make her decision in the coming days. So it will be very, very soon when we will know whether the preliminary injunction is granted to the FTC. It's been a pretty crazy couple of days, starting from late last week into the beginning of this week, with the FTC going against Xbox. We've saw tons of information coming out of the inner workings of the video game industry and the video game business, specifically, obviously, between Xbox and PlayStation, deals, letters, emails, all of this stuff. And I don't think at any time previous to this, we have seen this type of information come out, or probably won't see a lot of this going forward ever again. Now, there was a ton of stuff yesterday or today that was interesting, but the biggest thing here were the closing arguments, where we kind of could see what the final arguments of the FTC and Xbox were, and Judge Corley's thoughts on the entire situation, as she did chime in here on a bunch of stuff. So one of the biggest things, I'm not going to go over everything, because we're at that point now. We're just going to wait for the decision. And my personal opinion, which means really absolutely nothing when it comes to this law stuff, is that it really seems like the FTC has a pretty weak case, in that they weren't able to prove the harm over these 5 days of how this deal is going to really hurt customers. How is this deal going to hurt the market, and how is it going to be anti-competitive? It just seemed like they didn't really have anything. It also seems like they just don't really understand the industry very well, especially when the analysts and the numbers that they were using and all that type of stuff just seemed extremely off. But one way to kind of push home that point is we saw this, and I think this is very, very important, because throughout the trial so far, a lot of people are of the opinion, and even I am starting to think this, because it just really sounded like it so far, was that it seemed like the FTC was in there on Sony's behalf and not on the consumer's behalf. And here is what the judge says. It's not the harm to Sony, it's the harm to consumers. And this, from what I understand, was Judge Corley responding to the FTC referencing harm to Sony. And I think overall, from a layman's perspective, from you and me here, I'm assuming, aren't lawyers, listening to everything here that is going on between the FTC and Microsoft and their arguments, is that the FTC, everything that they have been pushing forward has been sounding like they're there to be protecting Sony, to protect the console market leader, which is the PlayStation. So it's good to see that the judge has kind of recognized that in response to them referencing Sony, saying it's about the consumers. This is going to be anti-competitive for the consumers, and that needs to be proven. How is this going to harm the market, which will make it worse off for gamers and for the consumers? So that was pretty cool to see here. The judge did mention that. Now, some other stuff that they did really focus on, which makes a ton of sense, because you look at what the CMA did to block this deal, is they mainly focused on cloud gaming, and they went at it here with cloud gaming. It says here, moving on to subscriptions in the cloud. Judge Corley moves on to subscriptions in the cloud. The next big thing is multi-game subscriptions, and then the cloud, says the FTC lawyer, before acknowledging subscriptions are more developed at this point. And here's what the FTC lawyer says. We've seen from Microsoft documents and their emphasis on cloud and subscriptions, Game Pass is a strategic driver for Microsoft's gaming business. The effect of this transaction to turbocharge Game Pass, leave Google, Amazon in the dust, and build the content moat around Game Pass is in the record and compelling. There is a concern that you take this content and use it to advance your own platform, and the consumer is harmed. And the FTC arguing that we end up in a world where instead of having content available, it's all just Game Pass, and maybe Sony has PlayStation Plus, and those two suck up all the content, and that's it. Now, Microsoft responds to these FTC cloud concerns, saying, with all of these other streaming services, they are all going to have the ability to stream the game, which they don't have today. Judge Corley says to the FTC, in some sense, you won and you got what you wanted. You forced them to enter into these agreements. And they're focusing here on those agreements of the 10-year deals to Ubisoft, Boosteroid, to Nintendo. One that they tried to offer to PlayStation, which obviously they haven't accepted, and the one that they also gave to NVIDIA GeForce Now. So they're saying here, or the judge is saying here, that the FTC has kind of already won with this case in a sense that they have forced Microsoft to go out there and guarantee these games on other services for 10 years. Now, the FTC does say here that we have evidence there are agreements. We don't have evidence of anything beyond agreements. So pretty much just mentioning here, sure, there's agreements, but we don't actually know what is written in these agreements to hold Microsoft to account for the 10 years and putting all of these games on there, and what other things are within these agreements that potentially they could do to hurt competition and to harm the companies that are receiving these games. Now, Microsoft does come back at this, and they call it the skepticism for these cloud contracts absolutely absurd. They say here, the question is, what is the output of those agreements? And there's no dispute that Call of Duty is going to be in cloud services if the transaction goes through. So you have asked, and I asked every one of our executives whether they would honor these contracts. They said it in open court. They said it to you under oath, and they've said it for the last year, to be honest. And that is absolutely true. Microsoft has continuously been saying this, and I've seen the arguments that we don't know what's in those contracts, but they have said that they are going to be providing these games under oath in court. So they are obviously going to be giving these games for 10 years. I guess it's the other fine print stuff that the FTC is interested in. They say here, are they really honestly suggesting that we weren't credible? They're going to get up in a public courtroom in front of you, lie about whether they would honor these contracts. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. Really, it is to suggest that Satya Nadella got up in your courtroom and said he would honor it. In fact, he doesn't even like exclusives. He would like this content to be everywhere. And focusing here on his testimony yesterday, I think it was yesterday, where he said, I don't like exclusives, but this is the market that Sony has created, so we are forced to participate in it. I mean, pretty much what he said there. And he got up there in the courtroom and said that they are going to be giving those games on to the other services that they've offered these 10-year deals to. So that's what they're focusing on. They call it the FTC and say that their skepticism is absolutely absurd. I mean, I don't see Microsoft backing away from these deals if the Activision Blizzard acquisition does get approved. It just doesn't make any sense, I think, from a business perspective, and the fact that they are still going to be making a ton of money by giving these games over to these services. I mean, bringing more people into Xbox first-party games is only a good thing for Xbox. And when you're offering Call of Duty on other streaming services, like Ubisoft and Boosteroid, which are bring your own game streaming services, those customers still actually have to go and buy Call of Duty and pay, which makes Microsoft money. So it makes no sense why they wouldn't honor these deals. To them, it's a win-win, and it's obviously a win-win too for the smaller companies that are going to be able to attract more people to their services because they have the Activision catalog available to them. Now, the next part here is talking about why aren't cloud contracts positives for consumers. They're still debating that. And Judge Corley says, how is Microsoft giving NVIDIA content not a positive for consumers? The FTC says, it could be, but we don't know. We have no evidence. Judge Corley says, that's why in many ways I say you won, because you and the other regulators have forced them into deals. And the FTC's response here is, I don't think we won because we have no evidence of what these agreements will lead to. So that's their only argument really against cloud right now. That's what it has sounded like in these closing arguments, is that there's an agreement here that these deals are good, and it has forced a major trillion-dollar company like Microsoft to provide content to other companies, where maybe if there wasn't any of this pushback from the FTC, from the regulators, and even from PlayStation, maybe they wouldn't have made these 10-year deals. So in that sense, it is actually a win here for the regulators. But their only argument against all of this isn't that cloud gaming is going to be destroyed because Microsoft has all of these servers and all the type of stuff. It's that they just don't know the exact fine print of everything that is involved with those 10-year deals. And it's funny here, they actually talk about PlayStation Plus. And Judge Corley calls God of War the Thor game on PlayStation Plus and says, I don't understand why Sony won't make its PlayStation Plus subscription better. She wants to figure out this market, and once again says that it all comes down to Call of Duty. So this is really intriguing here because, as we know, PlayStation Plus and PlayStation, with a snap of their fingers, could make PlayStation Plus better by putting the Thor game in there or by putting their first-party content in the service. And you essentially have Judge Corley here saying, why won't they just make their PlayStation Plus subscription better and more enticing and compete with Xbox Game Pass? It can't all just come down to Call of Duty, which has been the main focus. And I think that's actually a great point. And that's the truth. The reality of the situation is, from the beginning of this entire thing, PlayStation, all they had to do is come out and say, hey, we're going to put our first party games into PlayStation Plus, and there would be an onslaught of people going and signing up for the service. Because if you kind of strip out the first party stuff and maybe some third party exclusive deals or third party day one deals, you strip out some of that stuff, in general, the services are the same. Like, they're very similar. There's lots of games that overlap, and I would say PlayStation Plus, if you're on the PlayStation platform, is a good service to sign up to. If you just want to have a large catalog of games to jump into and not have to go out and spend $70 on new games all the time, it is great. What sets Game Pass apart, of course, is the big first-party content in Game Pass. Just gives the value way more than PlayStation Plus. And then you think about all of the Activision Blizzard games that would make their way into the service day one. It won't even come close to what PlayStation Plus is doing now. But the response there is PlayStation can compete. It's not because Activision Blizzard got purchased that they can't compete with PlayStation Plus. They already have a very successful catalog of first-party content to be put in the service. And they continue here to talk about Call of Duty and saying that they wouldn't be here in court if Microsoft made Call of Duty. Judge Corley says it's the purchasing right. We don't benefit from just buying up each other. We benefit from keeping things separate and therefore incentivizing people to create themselves. And Microsoft pushes back on this and says, that's not true. We want smaller groups to create content, right? And the fact that someone purchased and they're not small anymore, Activision, they produce popular content and someone else wants to buy it to distribute it, and then someone else wants to make more content, and that's the art that's going on, whether it's movies, gaming, television. No one says if you don't have this one game or this one television program or movie, you can't compete. So they're again focusing there on Call of Duty. And then it ends off and she makes fun of these Sharpies. As we know, redacted information from Sony got spread around the internet because they use Sharpies to cross stuff out. And then when they scan the documents, we could see a lot of the PlayStation numbers. So she says, don't use Sharpies, and that the decision will be coming in the next oncoming day. So lots of really interesting stuff here in these closing comments. And now it is over and we wait for the judge's decision. Now, one thing that we also did find out, which is cool to see, because there's always been that debate as to whether Phil Spencer was honest with the entire ZeniMax deal about exclusivity. And I've always said from the beginning, if you've actually listened to what Phil Spencer has said, he hasn't wavered from what they are going to be doing with exclusive games. And it seems like the decision to keep games exclusive was made back in 2021 during a meeting. So this was CFO Tim Stewart, who was on the witness stand. It says the FTC called attention to a chat conversation from November 2021 between Stewart and Xbox's Matt Booty. It says the two are messaging about a recent monthly business review meeting between Xbox and ZeniMax, where Spencer apparently made the call to make all ZeniMax games exclusive going forward, not just new IP. Stewart was asking Booty about what happened during the meeting, and he says, all games going forward, Stewart asked, not just new IP, but all games going forward. Wow. Confirming here that Phil Spencer made the call that games were going to be exclusive with the entire Bethesda catalog. And Matt Booty confirmed during the chat conversation in writing that Phil Spencer told them that all titles going forward, Xbox exclusive. So Phil Spencer, he puts out this persona here that he is just this nice guy and wants to give games to everybody. He just wants everyone to be happy in the gaming industry and the consoles. But the reality of the situation is he's out there to win. He's out there to compete. He knew that by making games exclusive such as Starfield, it is going to be a big boost to the Xbox business and the Xbox brand. And the fact that he's come in and changed what exclusivity really means, because it's not just about consoles anymore. It's about the ecosystem, and that having great content in your ecosystem is going to be the winning strategy going forward. And that's why he's going out here and making these games exclusive. Now, it says here, the two went on to discuss how pulling all Bethesda titles from PlayStation will cause profit issues in Microsoft and ZeniMax's deal model. He says, we will have accountability margin issues in the deal as we pull a huge number of PS units out of the model. And this means Xbox and ZeniMax's projected profits after the acquisition factored in releasing some Bethesda games on PlayStation before this decision came down from Phil Spencer. Now, we also understand from last week was that at the end of the day, Phil Spencer had the final say on any exclusivity when it comes to games. It was a game by game basis, but it didn't really matter what the developer and publisher wanted, or the studio wanted, I should say. Phil Spencer had that final say on whether the game was going to be exclusive or not. So I find this information pretty fascinating here based off of everything that we thought and we heard, and just the kind of persona that Phil Spencer pushes forward. He made the tough call here, knowing that it will be beneficial to the Xbox business. But I will leave the video there, guys. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. If you are new here, hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.
We'll be right back.